I never imagined I'd find myself in this position. To keep things discreet, I'll speak in general terms. Let's call my husband Deacon and me Ginny. We're both in our late 20s, married for just over 2 years, and until recently, I believed our love was unshakable. We met by chance, a fleeting moment in a crowded place that turned into something neither of us expected. A casual conversation led to an exchange of numbers, and from there, everything unfolded like a story I thought would have a happy ending. For me, at least, it felt like love at first sight. We dated for 6 months, then moved in together for a year before tying the knot. My parents insisted on a grand wedding, sparing no expense, except for the bar tab and the honeymoon, which Deacon's parents generously covered. From the beginning, our families embraced our union. My parents adored Deacon, and his parents treated me like the daughter they never had. Our marriage was the kind people envied, natural, effortless, built on kindness and mutual respect. Deacon was a good man, and I loved him. So you might wonder, what's the problem? The problem is that I betrayed him. It happened 2 months ago. A moment of weakness, an act of selfishness that shattered everything I thought I stood for. And now, I am drowning in guilt. Every time Deacon does something thoughtful, bringing me coffee in the morning, kissing my forehead before bed, brushing a stray hair from my face, I feel like a fraud. It gnaws at me, this awful, unshakable feeling that I don't deserve him anymore. In an attempt to erase my mistake, I've overcompensated, smothering him with affection, making sure he never questions my love. He thinks I'm just being extra sweet. My father even teased us about it, laughing when he caught us wrapped up in each other at a family dinner. "You two need to get a room," he joked. If only he knew. I won't go into the explicit details of what happened, but I will explain how I ended up in this mess. It started when my company selected me for a high-stakes project, a venture so critical to our shareholders that failure wasn't an option. It was a prestigious opportunity, one I had worked hard for, but the pressure was crushing. One of my teammates, a woman, had a full-blown breakdown under the strain. The work was mostly remote, but there were 3 in-person meetings along the way. As we neared the final phase, a problem arose in my section, one that could have jeopardized everything. I was sent to one of our regional offices for a week to fix it. Initially, 3 of us were supposed to go, but at the last moment, the woman who had broken down pulled out, leaving just me and another colleague. Let's call him Percy. We weren't particularly close before this, but in that high-pressure week, we became a team. We worked grueling hours, starting at 7 a.m. and pushing past 10 p.m., night after night. We barely left the office, ordering in food, barely speaking about anything other than work. By Wednesday afternoon, we finally cracked the problem. The wave of relief was so intense it felt surreal. To celebrate, Percy suggested dinner at a nice restaurant. "We earned this," he said, and I agreed. The drinks flowed too easily. After days of exhaustion and stress, the alcohol hit harder than it should have. The lines between exhaustion, relief, and recklessness blurred. Back at the hotel, one thing led to another. I won't justify it. I can't. The next morning, I woke up with a dull ache behind my eyes, a weight pressing down on my chest. And yet, I let it happen again. It wasn't until Thursday night that the full reality of what I had done sank in, like a slap across the face. Percy felt it too. We sat in silence, the air thick with regret. "This never happened," he said finally. "We forget it, erase it. No one can ever know." I nodded. What else could we do? We both had too much to lose. He was engaged, I was married. If anyone at the company found out, it could destroy our careers. And so we buried it. I told myself I could forget, that once I returned home, everything would go back to normal. But that was a lie. On the flight back, I convinced myself I was fine. But as the plane descended, anxiety coiled around my chest like a vice. The moment I saw Deegan standing in the airport pickup area, his face lighting up as he spotted me, my composure cracked. I burst into tears. I ran into his arms, clutching him as if he were the only thing keeping me from falling apart. He held me close, whispering, "Baby, what's wrong?" I swallowed back the truth and gave him the only explanation I could. "It was just so much stress. And I missed you so much. That's all." He believed me. Why wouldn't he? I had never given him a reason to doubt me. That night, we made love, and for the first time in our marriage, I felt nothing but guilt. Since then, I've gone out of my way to take care of him. Every little gesture is an attempt to atone for what I did, cooking his favorite meals, leaving sweet notes in his lunch, showering him with affection. And he loves it. He's happy. He deserves every bit of love I give him. But me? I'm slowly unraveling. Guilt is eating me alive, growing stronger every day, until I'm afraid that one day I won't be able to hide it anymore. I barely sleep anymore. When I do, my dreams betray me. Every night, I see Deegan's face twisted in heartbreak, his eyes hollow with betrayal. I reach for him, but he steps back, disappearing into the shadows. I wake up gasping, drenched in sweat, heart pounding as if I've lived through the moment I fear the most. The guilt isn't just in my mind, it's in my body now. My appetite is gone. Food tastes like nothing. At work, I zone out, making careless mistakes I'd never have made before. My boss has already asked if I'm feeling okay. I tell him I'm just stressed. If only he knew. And yet, all I want is to be close to my husband. To touch him, to lose myself in the warmth of his arms, as if his love can absolve me. I've smothered him with affection since coming home, afraid that if I stop, if I let him see me as I really am, he'll sense something is wrong. Then last week, everything changed again. We decided to try for a baby. Deegan was overjoyed. I smiled, nodded, kissed him, playing my part perfectly. But inside? Inside, I felt like I was suffocating. The thought of carrying his child, of bringing new life into this world, while keeping this secret? It's unbearable. I don't deserve him. He deserves someone better. I can't do this for another week. The worst part is, I have no one to confide in. The only person who knows is Percy, and we've made it clear we'll never speak of it again. So, I carry this alone, feeling my conscience claw at me, whispering the truth I don't want to hear. You have to tell him. But how? Telling him will shatter him. I know it. I'll see it in his face, in the way he looks at me afterward, like I'm a stranger, like I'm someone he never really knew. Yet, I cling to the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, he could forgive me. Deegan is a kind man, a loving man. If anyone could find it in their heart to move past this, it's him. But will he? That's the question that haunts me. So here I am, stuck between the weight of my guilt and the terror of losing him. Do I tell him the truth, knowing it could break us? Or do I stay silent, carry this burden alone, and spend my life trying to make it up to him in every way I can? If anyone out there has been through this, if you confessed, or if you've kept your secret, please tell me. I need to know how this ends. First update, 32 days later. I've read every single response. Some of them were brutal, but I appreciate the honesty. After weeks of torment, sleepless nights, and 3 sessions with a therapist, I've made my decision. I'm telling Deegan. I don't know how he'll react. I'm preparing myself for anything. My therapist helped me create a detailed timeline of what happened, not that it was complicated. It lasted less than 24 hours. There was no emotional involvement, no lingering affair. Just a mistake. But mistakes can ruin everything. I've also been reading articles on how to support a betrayed spouse, specifically what not to do. I need to be ready for the fallout, for whatever space he might need from me. And yet, deep down, I still hope. I hope that because Deegan is the man I know him to be, kind, generous, protective, he won't leave. That he'll hurt, yes, but that his love for me might be stronger than his pain. I guess I'll find out soon. Wish me luck. 13 months later. It's been over a year since my last post. I never thought I'd come back here, but many of you have reached out, asking what happened. I owe you an update. Looking back, I wish I had never told him. That Saturday morning, I made his favorite breakfast. I kept my voice steady, rehearsed everything I'd practiced in therapy. I told him everything, how it happened, why it meant nothing, how deeply I regretted it. Deegan said nothing. He just looked at me, like I wasn't even real. Then, without a word, he stood up and walked into his office. The door clicked shut. I followed. Tried the handle. Locked. I pressed my forehead against the door, whispering apologies, telling him how much I loved him, how I would do anything to fix this. Silence. I forced myself to step away. Every article I read said to give him space. Let him process. So I waited in the living room, my stomach in knots. Then I heard it. His voice. Low, urgent. Talking to someone. Who? I tiptoed back to the door, straining to hear, but the words were muffled. My phone buzzed in my lap. My mom? I ignored it. 10 minutes later, there was a knock at the front door. I got up, looked through the peephole, and my stomach dropped. My parents were standing outside. I opened the door, intending to ask my parents to come back later. Deegan and I were in the middle of something deeply personal, something that needed to stay between us, at least for now. But before I could get a word out, my mom's voice cut through the silence. Deegan called us, she said, her face pale, her eyes unreadable. He told us everything. My stomach dropped. No, he wouldn't. I turned to my father, struggling to find the right words, but his expression was already grim. Is it true? He asked. Did you have an affair with one of your coworkers? For a moment, I thought about denying it. The words were right there, ready to tumble out. But the weight in my chest was too heavy to hold back. My lips parted, and before I knew it, the truth escaped in a whisper. Yes! And just like that, I shattered the last fragile pieces of my old life. Tears blurred my vision as my mother let out a sharp breath, shaking her head. How could you do this? She asked, her voice a mix of disappointment and disbelief. Before I could respond, Deegan emerged from the office. But he didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge me. Instead, he turned to my parents, as if I were nothing more than a ghost in the room. Take her, he said flatly. I can't deal with her right now. I stepped forward, desperate, my voice cracking. Deegan, please. Nothing. He didn't even flinch. I reached for him, wrapping my arms around him, willing him to hold me back. But he stood stiff, unyielding, like a man carved from stone. When I finally let go, he turned away without a word, retreating back into his office and locking the door behind him. The sound of the lock clicking into place might as well have been the sound of my heart breaking. My parents, still reeling, started firing questions at me. How long? Why? With who? But I couldn't take it. My world was already unraveling too fast. I ran to the bedroom, slamming the door shut. My mother followed, her voice softer now, trying to piece me back together as I crumbled. After a long, painful conversation, she helped me pack a bag and I left. Before walking out, I pressed my palm against the office door. I love you, I whispered. I'll give you space. But when you're ready, please talk to me. Silence. That night, I sent him message after message. Apologies. Promises. Desperate pleas just to hear something from him. Nothing. Finally, I sent one last text. I'm coming over. I need to know you're okay. His reply was instant. Give me space. It was the last thing he said to me that day. Sunday morning, the second blow. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, cold, distant, unreachable. When I finally dragged myself out of bed, my parents were already at the kitchen table, drinking coffee, their faces drawn with something heavier than disappointment. I know what I did was wrong, I murmured, rubbing my temples. You don't have to keep looking at me like that. My dad set down his mug with a quiet clink. It's not just that, Jenny. A flicker of unease crawled up my spine. Then what? He exhaled slowly, as if bracing himself. Deegan was here earlier. I bolted upright, eyes wide. He was? Did you talk to him? Dad shook his head. No, we didn't see him. But we know he was here. Confusion clouded my thoughts. How? If you didn't... Then I saw it. Through the kitchen window, in the driveway, sat my SUV, stuffed to the brim with trash bags. A slow, icy horror seeped into my bones. I barely registered my parents calling after me as I rushed outside, my feet unsteady beneath me. I yanked open the car door, and the moment I saw what was inside, my clothes, my shoes, my toiletries, my entire life packed up like garbage, my knees buckled. I collapsed on the pavement, sobbing. Monday morning, the final cut. I didn't hear from him again. Not a word. By Monday morning, I was desperate. I called into work, requesting 3 days off. I needed to fix this. I needed to see him. When I arrived at our house, I knew something was wrong the second I stepped inside. The bedroom closet was half empty. His clothes gone. My breath hitched as I turned in a slow circle, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. I moved toward the office, and that's when I saw it. Our wedding album. Or rather, what was left of it. The cover sat beside the shredder, the pages inside reduced to unrecognizable strips. I staggered back, a hand flying to my mouth. No. No, he wouldn't. But he had. I ran through the house, searching, hoping, praying that I was wrong. But every framed photo of us was gone. Not a single trace of our life together remained. And then I found the empty frames. He hadn't just removed the pictures. He had destroyed them. I stood there in the middle of what used to be our home, surrounded by ghosts of memories he had erased, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I truly understood. This wasn't just space. This was the end. Wednesday morning, nowhere to run. I tried to call him. No answer. So I called his office. The receptionist told me he wouldn't be in all week. Panic flared in my chest. I needed to know where he was. I dialed my mother-in-law. She picked up on the first ring. But the warmth that was usually in her voice was gone. Jenny, please, I whispered. Please tell me where he is. I just need to talk to him. A pause. Then, in the coldest voice I had ever heard from her, she said, I know where my son is. But you don't need to. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had always been close to his family. They had always treated me like their own. But now? Now, I was nothing more than a name on a list of mistakes. As I sat there, gripping my phone, staring at the walls of my childhood bedroom, a terrifying realization washed over me. Deegan wasn't just taking space. He was disappearing. And I had no idea if I would ever get him back. The final blow. The call started late in the afternoon. Percy. Again and again. I sent them straight to voicemail, unable to face whatever he had to say. But when the notifications piled up, curiosity got the best of me. With a deep breath, I pressed play. His voice was frantic. "Jenny, call me back. Now!" Another message. "This is serious. You need to pick up." Then, in the last one, his tone turned ice cold. "Deegan told my fiancée everything." A chill ran down my spine. I called him back immediately. The moment he answered, his voice was sharp, cutting straight to the point. "We had a deal. We weren't going to tell anyone." I swallowed hard. "I didn't plan for this, Percy. I never expected Deegan to react this way." His anger only grew. "Well, he did. And now my life is falling apart, Jenny. My fiancée is losing her mind. Do you understand what you've done?" I barely had the strength to respond, but he wasn't finished. "I told her your husband is lying, that nothing happened. She's going to call you. You need to back me up." I closed my eyes. "I can't do that. Jenny, please. If you ever had an ounce of respect for me, you'll help me fix this." "I won't lie," I whispered. Silence. Then his voice, lower, laced with fury. "You selfish." The insults came like bullets, each one striking deeper. I let him rage for a while, listening to him unload all his anger, all his blame, until finally I'd had enough. I hung up. Then I blocked his number. Less than 10 minutes later, my phone rang again. Unknown number. I hesitated, but I knew exactly who it was. I answered. Percy's fiancée. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just listened as I told her the truth, my voice shaking, every ugly detail laid bare. When I was finished, she simply hung up. And just like that, Percy lost everything. The aftermath at work. I walked into the office the next day, hoping for a shred of normalcy. That hope died the moment I was called to HR. At first, I wasn't worried. The HR director was a friend, surely. This was a routine check-in. But when I stepped inside and saw the security director seated beside her, dread coiled in my stomach. "Please have a seat," she said, her expression unreadable. I sat. "We've received a report that you and Percy engaged in an affair during company time and misused company resources." My breath hitched. I tried to explain, tried to tell them that it never happened during work hours, that it was a personal mistake, not a professional one. But it didn't matter. When salaried employees travel for business, the entire trip is considered company time, she clarified. And the hotel? It was paid for by the company. That makes it a company resource. My world spun as I realized what this meant. Then came the questions. "Did you have dinner with Percy that second night?" I hesitated. "Yes." "Did you drink alcohol?" 2 glasses of wine." "Who paid?" My stomach clenched. "Percy." She exchanged a glance with security before folding her hands. "That violates company policy. Employees are not allowed to use another employee's corporate card for food or drinks." I closed my eyes. A final written warning. It could have been worse. For Percy, it was worse. He wasn't just written up, he was fired. Not just for the affair, but because he had extended his stay on the company's dime. He had booked another night, changed his flight, and charged everything, hotel, meals, 2 more bottles of wine, without a valid business reason. His reason was me. And now he had lost his job because of it. For days, I was haunted by guilt. He was a great employee, a rising star, and I had dragged him into my mess. But I also knew he had made his choices. We both had. We just hadn't expected the price to be this high. The final goodbye. The following Monday, I was at my desk when the receptionist called. "Jenny, there's a delivery for you up front." My heart skipped. A delivery? I had a ridiculous thought. Maybe it's from Deegan. Maybe this was his way of reaching out, an olive branch after all these months of silence. I clung to that hope as I hurried to the front desk. And there, waiting for me, was a man holding a box of flowers. I felt a flicker of something, hope, relief, foolish optimism. I signed for them, took the flowers, inhaled deeply. Then the man handed me an envelope. "Mrs. Jenny," he said in a monotone voice, "you have officially been served with divorce papers." It took a second for the words to register. Then the world crumbled. I barely made it back to my desk before the tears came. I left work early, unable to keep myself together. I took the rest of the week off, unable to function. And from that moment on, Deegan never spoke to me again. 7 months later. For 7 months I tried. I called. I texted. I sent letters. I begged his family to help me reach him. But Deegan had made up his mind. He never responded. Not once. The kind, loving man I had married, the one who held me when I cried, the one who whispered, "forever," into my ear, he was gone. And the person who remained wanted nothing to do with me. Our divorce is finalized now. And though I accept my mistakes, though I acknowledge my fault, I never anticipated just how completely Deegan would erase me from his life. I used to think love was strong enough to survive anything. I was wrong. And now, the only thing left to say is this. Deegan, if you ever come across this, I am so sorry. And I will love you always. All right, that was a fun story. Now let's move on to another exciting one. Stay tuned and let's dive in. I'm 36 years old, and my wife is 38. We met in college. She was a year ahead of me, and from the moment our paths crossed, something clicked. What started as an unexpected encounter turned into something deeper, something lasting. We dated for 3 years before deciding to move in together, and after another 3, we made it official. Marriage suited us. 2 years later, we welcomed our daughter into the world, completing what felt like a perfect family. Like any couple, we had disagreements, but they never lingered. We always found our way back to each other, sometimes in the middle of an argument, as if neither of us could stand the thought of going to bed angry. I worked hard to climb the corporate ladder, and eventually, I was able to afford a spacious 4-room apartment, the kind of place that felt like a dream when I was younger. We invested heavily in making it our own, every corner filled with the life we were building together. My wife, after her maternity leave, returned to work, and her career took off effortlessly. Between us, money was never an issue. We bought a second apartment for our daughter's future, drove luxury cars, traveled, and indulged in every comfort we could afford. Life was good. I loved my wife deeply, and I never once strayed. I wasn't a heavy drinker, just the occasional glass of wine with dinner, and I had even recently quit smoking. We planned vacations together, supporting each other's interests. I developed a passion for diving and skiing. She enjoyed skiing but never joined me underwater. Fear kept her from it. Our lives revolved around work, financial success, and the rewards that came with it. But then things started to change. The signs I ignored. My wife's job involved international business, negotiations, conferences, and meetings with foreign colleagues. At first, I didn't think much of it when her interactions with them became more frequent, extending longer into the evenings. But then came the messages. She started getting Snapchat notifications in the evenings, messages that always seemed to stop when she was traveling for business. It nagged at me, an itch at the back of my mind that I kept trying to dismiss. Once or twice, after she had fallen asleep, I checked her phone. Nothing. Every message was deleted. Every single one. I told myself I was being paranoid. That she had a perfectly reasonable explanation. That she wouldn't do something like that to me, to us. Then, one evening, she came home late. Too late. As she slipped off her coat, I forced a casual smile. Did you at least say goodbye to your secret admirer? For a fraction of a second, fear flashed across her face. Real, undeniable fear. But then, just as quickly, she recovered, laughing, calling me a fool. She kissed me on the cheek and moved on as if nothing had happened. I wish I could say I did the same. Instead, I let the doubt take root. Crossing the line. Her business trips became more frequent, and I reached my breaking point. I installed spyware on her phone. I told myself it was for peace of mind, that I just needed to be sure. The software gave me remote access, allowing me to record her surroundings, take photos, and see everything from my personal account. I hated myself for doing it, but I needed to know. A few days later, she left on another trip. That night, after helping our daughter with homework and tucking her into bed, I sat in the dim glow of my laptop and accessed the spyware account. I sent the first command. Record for 10 minutes. A file popped up. I clicked play. My wife's voice. Not just hers. A man's. They were alone in a room together, talking in English, laughing, drinking. The easy, relaxed kind of conversation that people have when they're completely comfortable with each other. My heart pounded as I sent another command. Record for 20 minutes. Take a picture of the surroundings. The image was a pitch-black square. She had placed the phone face down. My hands were shaking as I issued another command. Take a photo using the front camera. The image loaded. My stomach dropped. Her phone rested on the bedside table. Next to it, the headboard of a bed. The soft glow of a nearby lamp. I couldn't breathe. 15 minutes later, another recording appeared. I hesitated, then pressed play. More laughter. Then, the unmistakable sound of glasses clinking, liquid sloshing. I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping the edges of my chair until my knuckles turned white. I sent one last command. Record for 4 hours. Then, I poured myself a drink and numbed myself the only way I could. The moment everything changed. By morning, my body ached from sleeping in the chair. I woke with a heavy, nauseating weight of dread in my chest. My daughter had to get ready for school, but I couldn't bring myself to send her. I told her she could stay home for the day. Then, I called my boss and took a few days off. I needed time. I needed to listen. I opened the 4-hour recording. I barely made it through the first 40 minutes before my entire world shattered. The sounds, the ones I knew intimately, the ones I had heard for over 13 years, were now being made for someone else. I staggered to the bathroom, barely making it in time before I collapsed in front of the toilet, heaving violently. Pain tore through my chest, an ache so deep it felt like it would never end. I gripped the cold edge of the sink, staring at my reflection, but I didn't recognize the man looking back at me. What do you do when the life you built, the love you believed in, crumbles in an instant? What do you do when the person you trust most betrays you in the worst possible way? I didn't have an answer, but I knew one thing for certain. This marriage, our perfect life, would never be the same again. The breaking point. I couldn't tell if the nausea came from the hangover or the sheer weight of what I had discovered. Standing under a freezing shower for 20 minutes, I tried to shock my body back to reality. But no amount of cold water could numb the ache inside me. Every time I closed my eyes, the images flashed back, the recordings, the photos, the unmistakable sounds of my wife giving herself to another man. Afterward, I took our daughter to visit her grandparents, promising to explain everything later. I needed time, time to think, time to breathe, time to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. I returned home alone, though the apartment felt unbearably empty. During lunch, my phone rang. It was her. "Hey, love. How are you feeling?" Her voice was warm, concerned, genuine. It almost made me laugh. I stood there, gripping the phone, unable to speak. Did she really not suspect anything? Or was she just that good at pretending? Finally, I forced out. Not feeling great. I think I caught something. I'm going to stay home for a few days. Our daughter is with your mom. A beat of silence. Then, oh, okay. Let me know if you need anything, all right? I muttered something noncommittal and hung up. That day was the longest of my life. I sat on the couch, feeling like I was floating between rage and despair. The more I let my emotions pour out, the more numb I became. At some point, I must have cried. I don't even remember when. By nightfall, I was completely drained. And then, despite everything, I opened the spyware app again. More images. Some taken inside a restaurant, her and her colleagues, laughing over drinks. Others, from later that night, showed her hotel room. The phone was resting on the bedside table again. Voices filled the recordings, hers and his. No intimate sounds. Not yet. I stared at the screen, my jaw clenched. I was about to close the app when, suddenly, my phone buzzed. She was calling. I hesitated before answering. "Hey," she said, slightly breathless. I frowned. "Why do you sound out of breath?" She let out a tired chuckle. "The hotel elevator broke down. Had to take the stairs." Liar. I could hear the way her breathing slowed, becoming measured, controlled. Like she had already rehearsed this. We talked for a while. Small talk, nothing meaningful. I played my part, keeping my voice calm, steady. Then I ended the call with a soft, "Good night, love." The moment I hung up, I sent a rapid series of photo requests to the front camera. And there it was. Her mistake. She had placed her phone on the bed beside her instead of on the nightstand. The first image was tilted, slightly blurry, but unmistakable, her straddling a man, her head thrown back in pleasure. The second image showed the man's hands on her hips. The third confirmed everything I needed to know. I didn't need the recording, but I played it anyway. The sounds that filled my ears, the gasps, the moans, the broken whispers, shattered something inside me for good. I closed the app, stared blankly at the wall. This wasn't my wife anymore. This was someone else entirely. And I was done. The escape plan. I didn't check the spyware again. What was the point? I knew enough. Instead, I spent the next few days in a daze, figuring out my next move. By Sunday night, she came home, eager to kiss me. I turned my face away. "Still sick," I muttered, stepping back. The truth was, I couldn't bear to let her touch me. I couldn't even look at her. She frowned, concerned. "Maybe I should sleep in the guest room?" I shrugged. "I'm sleeping in the office." Without another word, I walked away. The next morning, I woke up before her. I left for work before she even stirred. At my desk, I went through the motions, barely registering anything. By the afternoon, I approached my boss and requested an urgent week off. Then I made my plan. That night, I called her. "I have a last-minute work trip." I lied. "I'll be gone for a day. Keep our daughter at your mom's. I have a surprise planned when I get back." She sounded excited. "A surprise? What is it?" "You'll see," I said, my voice flat. When I returned home, I packed my bag quickly. She helped, smiling, acting like the perfect wife. The sight of her pretending made me sick. I clenched my jaw, zipped my suitcase, and left. Before I walked out, I placed a USB drive on the nightstand. Inside was everything. Then I called a taxi and went straight to our second apartment, the one we had bought for our daughter's future. Once there, I dialed a close friend. "Want to go abroad for a few days?" "Hell yes." "Where to?" "Munich." Within hours, our flights were booked. In Munich, I confessed everything to him. We explored the city, met people, socialized with women. For the first time in days, I felt something close to relief. I ignored her calls. She messaged me relentlessly. I sent her a single text. Insert the USB into my laptop. 30 minutes later, my phone blew up with calls and messages. I turned it off. For 3 more days, I let myself forget. The return home. When I finally returned, I turned my phone back on. It took 5 minutes to scroll through all her messages. I didn't read them. I wasn't interested in her excuses. When I stepped into the apartment, an eerie silence greeted me. I set my bag down, removed my shoes, and was about to head to the bathroom when she emerged from the bedroom. I froze. She looked wrecked, her face swollen from crying, dark circles under her eyes, hair disheveled. The moment she saw me, she fell to her knees. "Please," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "Please let me explain." Tears streamed down her face, her words tangled in gasps and choking sobs. I stood there emotionless. She crawled toward me, grabbing at my hands, her breath hitching as she pleaded. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I don't even know how." I pulled away. "Don't make a scene," I said coldly. Her sobs grew louder. She clutched at her chest, gasping, calling herself names, saying she had ruined everything. I sighed, rubbing my temples. "What happens next?" I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. She blinked at me, stunned. "What? You want forgiveness?" I said, my voice steady. "You want things to go back to normal?" She nodded frantically. I let out a humorless laugh. "That's never going to happen." A new reality. At some point, the anger faded. So did the sorrow. I wasn't sure when it happened, maybe after I saw her on her knees, sobbing like a broken thing, or maybe after the first few nights of silence stretched into weeks. I looked at her then, this woman I had once loved more than anything, and felt nothing. No warmth, no longing. Not even rage. She cried out that she loved me, that she had only ever loved me, that she had been a fool, blinded by stupidity, and had ruined everything. But words meant nothing now. And as they say, revenge is best served cold. "We are no longer husband and wife," I told her, my voice even. "Just mom and dad. For our daughter's sake, we'll keep up appearances. But beyond that, you live your life, and I'll live mine." Her face crumbled. "Please, you are the only woman in my life." I cut in, my voice empty. "But not anymore." She flinched, but I didn't care. "Maybe one day I'll change my mind," I admitted. "But right now, the thought of touching you makes me sick." And then, just to twist the knife, I told her where I had been. How I had spent my days in Munich. How I had moved on. Her breath hitched. She didn't scream, didn't lash out. Instead, she simply nodded, as if accepting whatever punishment I was willing to dish out. But no one had forced her to speak. No one had forced her to cheat. Now she would endure. The new normal. We still lived under the same roof. Technically, to avoid property disputes, I had already purchased another apartment and put it in my father's name. But for now, I remained in our home, mostly sleeping in the office. Occasionally, for our daughter's sake, I slept in the bedroom. She never complained. Not even when she reached for me in the middle of the night, desperate for comfort, and I pushed her away. It had been 3 months since I last touched her. 3 months since I last kissed her. 3 months since I last saw her as mine. Her father was the only one who knew the truth. She hadn't confided in her mother. Maybe she was afraid of what would happen if she did. And honestly, she should be. Her mother valued family above all else. If she knew, she'd rip into her daughter without hesitation. But I wouldn't lie. If her mother ever asked, I'd tell the truth. The fun of watching her break. She made efforts, I'll give her that. She stopped staying late at work. Stopped taking business trips. Told me she had severed all non-business ties with him. I almost laughed. You don't need to tell me about your sex life, I said casually one evening. It's none of my concern anymore. She swallowed hard but nodded. I started staying out late. Not all the time, but enough to make her wonder. Every Friday, once our daughter was asleep, I left. And I didn't hold back. If I wanted to be with someone, I was. One morning, after returning home, I made sure to leave a pack of condoms casually placed on my office desk. When she came in to speak to me, she noticed them immediately. Her face went pale. Her lips trembled. And then she turned and walked out, quickly, before I could see if she was crying. I smiled. She still went to work. She still came home. But every so often, I caught her staring at me, like a frightened, wounded animal waiting for the inevitable. And yet, she hadn't left. She hadn't filed for divorce. I kept wondering when she would reach her breaking point. But she hadn't. Not yet. The game we play. We still functioned as a family. I still did the grocery shopping. I still helped our daughter with her schoolwork. We still had a housekeeper who handled the cleaning. From the outside, nothing had changed. But behind closed doors, everything had. We barely spoke except when necessary. And every time she looked at me with those pleading eyes, I twisted the knife just a little deeper. I wonder how much more you can take. I mused one night as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling while she curled up beside me, too afraid to touch me, but unable to move away. She didn't answer. She just lay there, silent, accepting. I found it amusing in a way. It's funny how people only realize what they've lost when it's too late. Some would say I was being cruel, but I wasn't the one who shattered our marriage. She was. For 6 months, she had lied, snuck around, slept in another man's bed, while I took care of our daughter, blissfully unaware. Now, she got to live with the consequences. Whenever I felt a flicker of softness, whenever I thought maybe I could forgive her, I reminded myself of that night. Of what I saw. Of what I heard. And just like that, the softness disappeared. Maybe one day, I'd have a real conversation with her. Maybe one day, I'd stop tormenting her. But not today. Not now.